In this Benchmark Factory for Databases video tutorial, we'll be talking about how to replay load that you've captured in your Oracle and SQL Server environments. Benchmark Factory allows you to replay the load, not capture it. So before you do this, you'll need to go into your SQL Server or Oracle environment and turn recording on. In Oracle, this is known as tracing. In SQL Server, you'll need to access the profiler. Once this information has been recorded, it's going to be either stored in a file or in a table, and then Benchmark Factory will be able to access that activity so that it can be replayed under the load as recorded or under enhanced or additional load. To start this, you'll want to come into the wizard again, open the load scenario, and we're going to step through this using Oracle. For Oracle, choose Replay Load from Oracle Trace File. You'll want to add your trace file. You'll want to look in the user dump folder on your Windows box, or if it's on a operating system other than Windows, you'll need to FTP the file down locally to the Benchmark Factory machine. You can add one or more trace files here. You can actually add, several dozen, hundreds, or even 1,000 or so trace files. The trace file will then be diagnosed by Benchmark Factory. We're going to look to see how much activity is in here. So you can import the entire amount of activity, or you can just narrow this down or filter it down to a specific date range. I can also tell it to ignore any of the non-user based activity. Again, do I want to add this to an existing script, or do I want to create a brand new one? And we'll create a brand new one. And I am not going to submit that because I want to look to see what it's generated for me. So now I have a new Benchmark Factory project that consists of this single trace file. If we had imported 10 or 12 trace files, we would have each of those listed as separate scenarios. In the individual scenario, if I click on each of these guys, I can see what's going to be ran now. I can set latency at the individual query statement level, or I can set it at the scenario level. From here we can add our real-time counters. Here for the scenario I can set the number of users and or the number of executions. So if I want this to run for 30 users instead of 1, I just hit 30 here. And if I want this to run 5 times each or 15 times each, or I can say, let this run for just 3 minutes for as long as it can go. And we're just going to do, we'll do 2 executions here. You may need to customize each of these statements. So for example, if you find a query with a bind variable in here, you might need to provide those values if the trace has not accepted it. If these are doing inserts, updates, and deletes versus simple selects, you can't have multiple users inserting, updating, and deleting sometimes the same information. That can cause locking events. So in a multi-user replay, you might need to invoke Benchmark Factory script engine. Again, that's a right-click, BF script, and then if you have an insert statement or a delete going against a record, you can use random generation of inputs, or you can have it read from a file. So for example, if you've got a bunch of accounts being accessed, you can get a list of account IDs, save that in a file, and then when Benchmark Factory runs this scenario for the 30 users, each user is going to be accessing a different part of the data. And this is really key too if you've got partitioned information stored across multiple physical devices. You can spread the load against, spread the I/O against all the physical devices as well. Just like any other Benchmark Factory script, I can submit this job. At this moment, I have again a chance to add comments, alerts, counters, and where do I want this to run against, for example. And it's going to run now. So it'll take a second for Benchmark Factory to establish those 30 user connections. It's going to start the agent for me. once each of these connections are available and ready to go, it'll actually start running these transactions. Then once it's done, we're going to be able to see the run reports results for each transaction inside the scenario and then overall. So it's actually started running now. And again, we told it to run twice each for 30 users. Once we've finished the test, we can access the run reports. And then we can also access the transaction statistics for each piece of the scenario. Number of rows, amount of bytes, number of executions, errors, average transaction time for each of these. So you can use this to identify bottlenecks in your execution runs. You're not limited to seeing it just for the entire run. A couple of quick notes for the trace file replays. You can imagine the amount of work it's going to take for you in some cases to come in and customize each of these statements, especially if you want to set up custom latencies for each or bind variable replacement. Benchmark Factory will split up these files and show you the individual statements up to a limit of 1,000 statements. Once you get into a trace file that's more than 1,000 statements, it's going to appear and be parsed into an XML file, and then you'll have to edit the XML file manually. So as long as you're doing, limited period of time replays and 1,000 statement or less, it's going to appear just like this. If you want to be able to do multiple runs of your trace file replay under multiple user loads, you'll notice we just were able to find a single user load. You can actually take this scenario, copy to a scalability test. So now that it's in a scalability test, I've got multiple user loads. So instead of doing 30 user load, I can start with 10 and go to 30 in increments of 10, for example. So now this is actually going to run 3 different times, and I'll be able to track the responsiveness of the entire workload and of each session over this run. I could save this as a new project. So this could be a project of a single replay, and then I have a project of multiple replays. So once our job is finished, now we can come in and look at the run reports. And now you can see we've got multiple data points to track performance over time. So I can look at response time and transaction time. Here all in one graph.